Hello, everyone. I'm Corey Andrew Powell, and welcome to another episode of Motivational Mondays presented by the NSLS, now motivating over 2 million members nationwide. Now, today we have a very special guest with us. He has mastered the art of turning passion into profit, from jazz musician to English teacher to a language learning entrepreneur. Olly Richards has taken an unconventional path to success. He began a blog called StoryLearning as a passion project, which he later transformed into a multi-million-dollar online business. And now through his newsletter and various educational platforms, he helps online entrepreneurs scale their businesses to 7 figures and beyond. And he's here today to share his lessons of what he's learned along the way about branding and scaling and creating a life that aligns with your vision of success. Olly Richards, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Well, thank you very much. Fantastic intro.
You're welcome. Well, it was just pretty much your life there. And I'm sure only
with all the boring bits taken out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you did it, I could at least read it about it, really quickly. So I feel like an underachiever, I will just add, basically, when I read that. I am fascinated by the work you do because, and I have subscribed, just so we're clear, like I'm not just coming from the outside here, like as an interviewer reading from a list of questions. I subscribe to your channel, and I had been a passionate language guy for a long time, mastering none of them, mind you, but always with good intention.
Yes.
I love that you break down so many sort of these little intricate things that we don't really think about when it comes to the intimidation of learning languages, which I'll be happy to get into in a little bit. But first, as I mentioned, you've had a really unique career journey: musician, teacher, entrepreneur. So I'd love to know what inspired you to start StoryLearning, and how did it become a $10 million business?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always been someone, I'm a creative person and I always have been, and I've always followed my nose really with the creativity. I played music since I was a child. When I discovered that I could go to music college, that was the only thing I thought about. I just loved playing music. I was a jazz pianist, and I was obsessed with that, lived the life for many years. And then I kind of fell out of love with it for various reasons, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But it was time to do something else. I think I'd realized, it took me a while to realize that it was time to cut ties. I was in my late 20s. So I decided to go and get on with my life, really. And I thought, well, what have I always wanted to do? And I've always wanted to travel the world. I always thought that teaching English abroad was quite a romantic vision. And so I did it. I trained, I got a CELTA qualification. I went to teach English in Japan. And then I lived there for 4 years. I moved to the Middle East, spent 1.5 years in Qatar, and then a year in Egypt. But throughout that whole time, I had another passion in the background, which was learning languages myself. And living in London in my 20s was just fantastic, because I was surrounded by people from all over the world. It must be a bit like living in New York or somewhere like that. And I became this person who didn't enjoy being a monolingual Brit. I wanted to be able to communicate with the people I met. And so I started learning languages. I went on to learn 8 languages. And then one day when I was living in the Middle East, it was a hot Saturday afternoon and I had nothing to do. I decided to start a blog. And the blog was on language learning. And the way that I think about it now really is that it kind of combined my experience learning languages with what I had learned about teaching from my English teaching experience. And I was able to combine those two things into something that was quite unique. There were many people who talked about language learning already back in the day. This was 2013, but it was always very kind of anecdotal. What I was able to do was to actually bring a bit of academic rigor to this, and actually talk about what's happening when you're learning languages, why that's happening. And I think that was one of the reasons why my blog became quite popular. And I never really expected it to do anything. But I'm the kind of person that takes things seriously. So when I started the blog, I then went off and learned how to grow a blog. And so, so I did that. And then, a couple of years later, I was in a position when my daughter was born, where I was able to quit my English teaching and then go full time on the blog. So it was all really there was no grand strategy. there was no master plan. It was just following, putting one foot in front of the next and seeing where it takes me.
That is fascinating. And especially with this being a leadership platform where very often people who are successful have had a similar path where it was actually unconventional. As we said in the intro, there's no necessary like linear path that's going to be the same for everyone. And so very often following your dreams and your passion is a way to find that independence, find that career. But I think we're kind of programmed differently to think, okay, I have to go to this, I got to do this, got to have a degree, and then you could be miserable doing something you don't even love.
Yeah, but you could also be broke following your passion. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's I think it's I don't know how I feel about the advice to follow your passion. I think I think it's you have to combine it with something else.
Mhm.
I know plenty of amazing jazz musicians who are broke, and it's not nice to see. I think one of the things I see often is that people who succeed tend to have they're not necessarily the best in the world at that thing. I know I'm not the best teacher, I'm not the best linguist, but I am very good at learning languages, and I'm very good at teaching, or good enough rather. And so by combining those two skills that I'm very good at rather than being exceptional, that combining those two makes a whole. And or it's kind of 1 + 1 = 3, So I think if you're going to follow your passion, you have to combine it with something else. And in my case, that was teaching, and then later marketing as well.
Mhm.
Because if it's passion alone, then and you see this a lot in the music world. Everyone goes to music college wanting to be the best, but there's only room for the top 1%. So if you're going to
Yeah.
follow your passion, Scott Galloway makes this point in his recent book as well. If you're going to follow your passion, you better make damn sure that you are the best in the world, because there's a long line of people who have followed their passion and it hasn't worked out great.
Yeah, sure. Well, and it's funny too, because like, as I mentioned before we started recording, I'm also a musician and songwriter. And so I went to New York and did that whole artist life, and like, got a
Wow.
little, and I,
Where did you go?
Well, when I was in New York, I didn't go to college for music. My mom wanted me to get a formal degree. In my mind, I was going to become the next Michael Jackson. So who needs a degree for that? And that was like one after the other, audition, and I'd always get the call back, and not the part. That on
Right.
Broadway, for example, as a vocalist, and that got tiring. Like, well, when am I going to get the big part? And then finally, I just said, and I was doing jingles, singing on demos and different projects. But what I realized, which I talk about often, and I think this is really important to what you're saying too, is like your passion for creativity is not what died. You pivoted, you changed your dream, still creative outlet, still the ability to create something. You didn't let it kill your spirit completely as a creative. That's what I think is really important about your story. Is mine as well.
Yeah, I absolutely recognize that. I feel as creative now. I'm going to be 40. How old am I going to be this year? I'm going to be 44 this year. I'm as creative now as I ever was. I'm just channeling it in different ways.
Yeah.
So, I always found, I always had this feeling with music, which is probably an unusual feeling, but there was something about the fact that you play music and it's lost forever unless you happen to be recording it. You play music and then the moment's gone, and you have nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
There was something always not quite right about that with me. And
Yeah.
it's similar if you're teaching a lesson. You can have an inspirational lesson where you can be absolutely on fire. Students love it, but then you walk out at the end and it's just like gone up in a puff of smoke.
Yeah.
The wonderful thing about writing and blogging and making YouTube videos is that when you put your creativity into the thing, it lives on, and people can come back to it later, and then you can disseminate it, and it seems to do something to the ego whereby the thing that you've poured your heart and soul into is still there, and it's tangible, and that was something that I think really appealed to me.
Yeah, I mean, we're artists, so there's a performative part of our personality where we want to show off a little bit, but not from an arrogant place. We want to show off our ability to have to show what we do with words, which is our specific way of creating a vernacular, which is not going to be like anyone else's. And so, I again, as I'm talking to you and as I was researching, again, the parallels, because my parallel universe was as a copywriter in advertising. So that was what allowed me to still have a voice. People can see
Mm,
my voice, even though they weren't hearing it. And so, I
yeah.
wasn't Michael Jackson. I was able to then write, and then that work would be in national campaigns, or that work would be. And I just talk to young people all the time about that is how you pivot the dream and don't give up completely. So it's really important. And I love that you have that same story. And I do want to ask you, when it comes to, in your opinion, when it comes to entrepreneurs who are struggling with like defining their brand, what are some of the key strategies that you used to attract the right audience to what you were doing?
Yeah, well, my world is very much, because entrepreneurship is a very big topic, and entrepreneurs range from people that start hardware stores in a local town through to Silicon Valley startups,
Yeah, yeah.
through to what I do, which is essentially building a brand around your expertise. So what I've done is I fit it broadly into the category of education, so online education businesses. And by far the easiest way to get started is by actually using your personal brand to
Mm,
get traction online. Because if you are teaching, taking in my case, I'm teaching languages. Well, there are many people teaching languages, and if you want to learn Spanish, why learn from me as opposed to any other person? But people tend to gravitate towards people like them, or people who they are drawn to for whatever reason. And your personal brand is completely unique. You can't be replaced by anyone else. You can be imitated, but you can never be duplicated.
right.
And so for many people now, it starts with the personal brand. You can do anything from it's the whole content creator pathway, right? So whether it's making YouTube videos, whether it's writing on LinkedIn, which is increasingly popular these days, whether it's starting a podcast, you can rely on your own personal charisma and your own personal voice to, in the early stages, connect with people who gravitate towards you as a person. Now, where you can get into trouble is when you try to grow that too far, because personal brands generally can only get you so far, because you then have to be at the center of everything as a personal brand. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so if you have the brand of Corey and you offer some kind of product or service, at some point everyone wants Corey. That's what they're coming for. And that was the problem that I had when I first started StoryLearning. It was all about Olly. And so what I eventually did was I defined the method that I was using to teach languages, and I've always taught languages through stories. And it's a method that I didn't invent using stories, obviously, but I did put together and codify this particular method of languages using stories. And I called it, surprise, surprise, StoryLearning.
Mm,
And what that did was it allowed the brand itself to grow to a place where it wasn't Olly that the customers were looking for anymore. It was the StoryLearning method,
mm,
because the testimonials that we have of people who have learned languages with us, they have learned not thanks to me, but thanks to the StoryLearning method that we use. And so as a business grows, that shift from personal brand towards a proprietary method or system allows the founder to step back and have other people in his or her place start to deliver the product itself.
mm-hmm. Well, in that regard, of course, that's sort of how it became successful. So I do wonder, on the flip side of that, what were some of the challenges you faced while you were trying to scale this business and get it to where it is today?
So the challenges were everything I didn't know. And this is the other thing, because all of us who harness the wonderful magic of the internet to start education businesses, we typically don't have backgrounds in business. So I didn't know anything about branding. I didn't know anything about hiring. So I made some terrible hiring mistakes.
Hmm.
I didn't know anything about financial management. So one of the most stressed I've ever been was when the business had grown and we were making 7 figures a year in revenue. I couldn't tell you where the money was coming from, where it was going. It was completely chaotic, but no one had ever taught me about basic financial good, best practice. And so I had to go off and learn about it. But until I learned about it, which essentially meant hiring people that could help me get the finances in order, it was very stressful, because with money flying everywhere in and out, it's not a comfortable place to be.
Mm-hmm.
when you start a business, I feel like you're paying down an ignorance debt for many, many years. There's all the things that you don't know. And you just have to kind of go through the ringer a few times, touching all the edges in order to understand what the real scope of being an entrepreneur and running a business actually is.
Yeah. I just gonna say I think that's like a metaphor for life in general, right? Like we are we are all pretty much like if you have a growth mindset, that's wonderful because we're never finished learning, but you pretty much are going through life making a lot of errors and then correcting them. And if you're smart, going, well, I know that didn't work, won't be doing that again. It was like marketing training that you got for free. Well, or not free if you invested money, but you know what I mean? It's like you get market research response back and you know that didn't work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it all has the benefit of existing. Everything you do has the benefit of existing in the real world, which is, if you imagine, it's very difficult for entrepreneurs to, it's a bit of a cliche that entrepreneurs often don't take MBAs very seriously because, or business school graduates very seriously because you cannot know anything in theory. There's such a gulf between knowing something in theory and knowing it in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing stuff out in the real world, it has the benefit of like as the famous saying goes, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. When you're doing these things out in the real world, everything is contact, and so whether stuff lives or dies based on how the market receives it, how it actually, how your whatever you're doing, how it performs out in the real world. And so if you can stay attentive and if you can stay attuned to what's happening when you try things, when you run experiments, if you can stay agile enough and motivated enough to try things, to test things, to not be too put off by failure, and keep going, eventually you do learn the lessons. But it is a difficult process. And I based on the many entrepreneurs that I see these days, the first 5 years are just one. It's like being stuck in a washing machine or dishwasher. You're just getting spun round and round and round, grabbing onto whatever you can, and it's almost like a rite of passage you have to go through.
It's funny though when you mention that, it makes me think of how organizations, big corporations, they are typically following the structure of always believing that, when it's time to get a new director of this or a director of that, they've got to go get like the C-suite people who went to Harvard. And I'm like, that's great. But, probably internally you have worker bees who've been in the organization, tried and tested. They've seen the failures. They've seen the attempts at different campaigns that didn't work and what to know. And so they're often like sort of overlooked for this notion of like, there's this piece of paper that will validate everything that we need in a new executive. And, I'd love that you just stressed the fact that like, there's a lot of things that you cannot know unless you are out in the field, as a warrior, having those battle scars at the end of the day. And if I were an organization, like I'm going to go with that person. That's just me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the big difference between the scrappy entrepreneur and the Fortune 500 company is that, when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting something new, you don't have anything to lose for the most part. When I started my website for the first time, I mean, I had a job. If the blog didn't work, I was okay.
Right.
Because I had if you're a $1 billion company, you've got a lot to lose, and so there's this other dimension whereby when you staff these important roles, when you bring on the VPs and the C-suite, there is a lot to lose, and so no one wants to be the person who screws up and who tanks a huge company, and so there tends to be a bias, or so I've heard, because I've never been in this environment, but this is what I've heard from people who have. There tends to be a bias towards safety and conservative choices, because all right, you may not become the next Amazon, but at least you're not going to sink the ship. And so there are a different set of incentives. And if you promote the kind of the people that have been in the company for a long time, I suppose the risk is that if they don't have the requisite management skills, because there is a big difference between being in the organization and then and managing. I mean, management is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
If that person doesn't have those management skills, you can do real damage and lots of consequences from there.
Hmm.
Entrepreneurs are not particularly stable people on the whole. I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult to be when you're first starting. You're playing the role of everything. You're playing the
Everyone. Yeah.
marketing, operations, finance, customer service.
Hmm.
You're doing it all.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You have to be a glutton for punishment, really.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things too. It's like a labor of love. I mean, like you said, it's a passion for that you have that drives you. But then if you are lucky enough to get successful, you do have to then begin to delegate. I interviewed a young Gen Z young girl who started like an Amazon store. I think she was like 20 years old, and she had in 3 years had hit like $1 million in
Wow,
sales. And
fantastic.
she was barely 20. And so it was fascinating to talk to her, but she was like, but yeah, there was a point where I was like a teenager going, Mom, there's $1 million in my, what do I do with that? I don't even, she said it was just coming in so quickly. She didn't even know how to process it. And finally she just said, you know what? I'm no longer a teenager. I am now a businesswoman. She said, I Googled, I researched, my mom and I sat down. I knew I had to hire this, had to hire that, because there were things I needed in place with people who knew what they were doing. I can't do it all. I think that's the other thing. People are hell bent sometimes on thinking they need to do everything and they don't know how to delegate. And how do you manage that?
Yeah, and that can carry on forever. I mean, I know many entrepreneurs who are still battling against that thing right now. It's I think people entrepreneurs will develop in different speeds and at different rates depending on two things. I think depending on their personality, but also to their access to other people. And one of the things that happens that's really unfortunate is people just work in silos. Especially online, it's possible to build a business from your kitchen table. But if you're lucky enough to have success, often that means that you then hunker down and you keep working away. And if you don't know anybody else, you don't actually know any better. No one ever tells you this stuff unless you're seeking out help.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's completely possible to just keep taking on more and more roles. It's often referred to as superhero syndrome. Taking on more and more roles. But then this goes right back to the idea of the ignorance debt that we spoke about before. At the beginning you just don't know, and so one of the things that correlates very, very strongly with success is entrepreneurs' willingness to get help, to hire coaches and mentors to help just speed up the rate of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's absolutely no reason to figure it out all by yourself. But many people do, and the less willing you are to spend money and time on your education, the less likely you are to move forward.
No, exactly. Great advice. And one of my favorite interviews here I've done thus far was with a woman named Kara Golden. And Kara Golden is the CEO and founder of a major, major beverage called Hint Water. And it's literally something she made in her kitchen when she didn't want to get her kids to get addicted to sugary drinks early on when they were like really young. So she just started squeezing fruit into water. That's pretty
Wow.
much what she
Wonderful.
did. And the kids loved it, right? They didn't get programmed into soda and they were like babies almost. And she said, this is interesting. She had no idea at that moment that the beverage industry is probably the most, if you're ever going to say there's a place you're not going to succeed, if you go up against, it's that industry, right? And anyway, but to your point, she educated herself. She didn't back down. She had a product. She sort of had a little proven test market already with her own kids. And so she went forward. And anyway, today it's one of the biggest success stories in the beverage industry, like a disruptor against Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Like amazing, right? Yeah. So I love that. Same like Kara, basically you are an example of two. Just have a vision, go for it, and just get all the ducks in a row to help you execute. So I think that's a great lesson. And you also talk about designing a life around freedom and fulfillment as well. So I'm wondering, like, what does that mean to you? Is that like a work-life balance, or how does that translate?
I have real trouble with the term work-life balance as it relates to entrepreneurship, at least, because the thing about entrepreneurs is that they tend to do the things that they really believe in and that really inspire them, and it doesn't really it's not work in the traditional sense. It is. I mean, that doesn't mean you're not working long hours. You're often working extremely long hours, but it is certainly for me. You know, the businesses that I run, and they are me, and they are kind of at one with my life. And I don't think about trying to balance my life with work, because they are one and the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, rather than thinking of it as this zero-sum game, it's much more about intentionally designing how you want your life to look. Now, for me personally, because I'm a creative, I've always had lots of things that I like doing. You know, even these days, there's languages I want to learn. There's there's all kinds of exercise I want to do. There are all these skills that I still want to spend time learning, and I've been through periods where my business has been all consuming. And so when I talk about the idea of designing your lifestyle, I'm starting from the point of view that, contrary to the hustle culture that is just pervasive online, where everyone says you should be working 25 hours a day and posting 1 million times a day on social media, and, you know, what do you mean you're not trying to 100x your company? You know, contrary to that, for me, a business has always been something that I feel privileged to be able to run, because I get to do my own thing every day. But I also try to design it in such a way that it allows me to do the things that I want to do in my life. And so, for example, in my business StoryLearning, I've recently handed over to a CEO who now runs the company without me. I mean, I'm still around, but I don't actually work inside the company, because that allows me to spend time on other projects that I'm interested in. So I'm writing my business newsletter, for example, at ollyrichards.co. I'm spending time on that because that's what enthuses me. I'm very deliberately designing that business so that I don't have a team, because teams are stressful. I don't want another team. So I'm making decisions that will keep the business smaller than it needs to be, but it gives me the life and the flexibility and the peace of mind that I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose it's about intentional choices that allow me to live the life that I want.
Yeah. Mm. So I guess it's like a balanced manageability in a way, you know. I know we don't like life-work balance, but it's managing the business in a way that allows you to still be hands-on as much as you can be, and also still have a fulfilling life outside of the office. So it's like a balance in that regard.
It's just, I think it comes down to intentionality, right? Because for most people who are in a 9-to-5, most people will prefer to spend time outside the office. They prefer their time at home doing their own thing to working. So it feels like a zero sum. For a lot of more conventional entrepreneurs, the route to success in a business, in a startup, is to make it as big as possible, sacrifice 5-10 years of your life for the big exit event at some point in the future. And exits in a business are lionized and idolized, and say, okay, you're really the only people who you consider successful are those who have sold their business for tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the way that we're conditioned to think about work is very much like sacrifice.
Yeah.
Whether it's sacrificing your time for a job you don't enjoy, sacrificing many years of your life. And many of my entrepreneur friends have done this. They've started startups and they say, look, man, I didn't get my 20s. My 20s just passed me by because I was taking investor calls and writing investor updates and laying off my whole team and raising fire, all these things. I spent my 20s on a beach in Brazil, living in Japan, and learning languages and things like this. I feel so privileged to be able to do that. And so when I think about the business and how I want to run my business, I'm not thinking about the office competing with home life. I'm not thinking about sacrificing years to build a business that I can sell. I'm thinking about right now, what does the optimal version of life look like? Can I take my family on holiday? Can we go and eat in nice restaurants? Can I have afternoons off to do nothing but sit in the garden and read a book? It's intentionality. And I feel that from all the all my various entrepreneur friends, I feel that I mean, it sounds very counterintuitive, but people often don't know what they want. If you sit down and ask me, what do you want life to look like? People often have just not really thought about it. There's this idea, well, I'd love to sit on the beach and drink martinis.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, maybe for a few days, but you get bored before long.
And
You're
drunk.
not, and you won't feel great. People say, oh, I want to live on and run a remote business on the beach. Well, if you tried looking at a laptop screen with the sun glaring, I mean, it's not with sand in the keyboard. It's no, people have just often do not really have a conception of what life would look like were they able to intentionally design it. And but again, one of the bits of magic of part of the magic of online businesses is that you do have the ability to construct the way that you spend your time in a way that's very special and was never available in the past.
Well, speaking of your language learning or story learning platform in general, I would like to ask you too, what's the biggest myth about learning a new language that you help to dispel through the work that you do?
Well, there's many. For some of the most common myths are that you have to have the language gene to learn a language, that you either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
Another one is that there's an age cutoff, so I'm too old to learn a language. Another very controversial one is that kids soak up language like a sponge, and kids are just natural language learners. Well, they might be natural language learners, but they don't soak it up like a sponge. I mean, have you spoken to a 6-year-old? They're not exactly articulate. Kids take 10, 12 years to become natively fluent in their first language. So, so should we be learning like kids learn? Not really. It doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of misconceptions about language learning. But I think from a learning perspective, I think there's a mindset that I see a lot, which is that people tend to treat language like any other school subject, like maths, where you can learn if you learn Pythagoras theorem, you can then use it to calculate things. If you learn equations for something else, you can then do something. If you learn the rules of science, then if you learn the periodic table, then you can, et cetera, et cetera. People see language as almost like a formula, where if you just learn the vocabulary and you learn the rules of the grammar, then you can piece together your sentences word by word in an accurate way. But that's not how language works. We as native speakers break the rules all the time. We stop and start our sentences. We use the wrong words. We speak with terrible grammar, and language is not constructed word by word. It's constructed in blocks, what are known as chunks. So when you say good morning, or you say how are you, you're not building that sentence one word at a time. You're regurgitating chunks of language that you've learned from elsewhere. And so what I'm getting at is that language is a skill that you develop, much like learning to control the ball in football, or learning to hold a snooker cue, or the what separates Picasso from the next artist. It's highly intuitive. It involves understanding the person in front of you. It involves integrating non-verbal cues, body language. It involves things like confidence and knowing how to read the room. All of these things. And so for people who find language learning very frustrating, one of the most liberating things can actually be to forget about this conception of learning to speak fluently, and actually treat it as more of a human challenge. Go and do a language exchange with somebody. Sit down and spend an hour speaking in Spanish and an hour speaking in English, and just enjoy the time. If you make mistakes, it doesn't matter. Keep going. Try to express yourself some way. Speak to the person in front of you. It's this. If you learn to treat languages as an extension of your own humanity, almost, then it releases you from needing to be perfect and fluent. Because when you can communicate on a deep level with somebody on a human level with somebody, it doesn't matter if you make a grammar mistake. That stuff is all out the window. So I see, this is why I write books of short stories, because people spend all their time in textbooks, but actually, if you've been learning and struggling with French for 5 years and you freeze up every time you try to have a conversation with a native speaker, well, if you can sit down and read a short story in simple French and get from the beginning to the end, you're going to feel so empowered, and you're going to feel so motivated, because you've actually done something useful and meaningful in the language, and you've enjoyed it, and you've succeeded at something. So that's a very long way of saying that I think people should worry a lot less about the details and much more about the humanistic side of languages.
That's fascinating, Olly, and I love that, man, because I do that little small wins when it comes to Spanish. I pick up native newspapers fully in Spanish, like, I'd love to see, there was one I used to love, I forgot the name of it now, in New York City, but I used to always get it for free on the little stand, and or I make sure I would watch like an hour a day of Telemundo or Univision, or and those small wins when you understand, even if it's a couple sentences of the newscaster, because they're going like, but it's like, wow, I understood that, and that's like what I use to keep going. So that's very, very great advice. And it's a fascinating conversation in general, and I'm really happy that you were here today with us. And I'd love to ask you, where can people who are interested in your language work, where can they connect with you, online or elsewhere?
Absolutely. Well, if you are interested in languages, then you can find me on my website, StoryLearning.com, or my YouTube channel, which is growing all the time and great fun. That's StoryLearning on YouTube. And if you want to follow me for my business stuff, you can again find me on YouTube, although it's kind of dwarfed by the language content. So it's a bit fiddly to find me on YouTube, but you can go to ollyrichards.co, and that's my website. You can join my newsletter, where I have a very long case study of it's about 120 pages, and it describes exactly how my language business works from top to bottom in a lot of detail. It's completely free, and you can go and download that and read that if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Excellent words of wisdom from Mr. Olly Richards, who is the founder and I guess the guru of StoryLearning, his passion project, which later became a $10 million online business. This is a great conversation, and I'm going to take a lot of it in as I start to get myself back on track this year with Spanish. It's my resolution for 2025. So Olly Richards, thank you so much for being here today with us on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you so much. Great questions. I really enjoyed it.